Thank you very much, Charlotte, for that introduction. And thank you, our speakers and participants, for giving your time and energy and knowledge to this session this afternoon. It's much appreciated. And I hope that we have a really good, strong, and even sometimes positive conversation as we try to think about what the future might involve, which I know is particularly difficult when we're talking about the B word, Brexit. So, but here we are. This is the reality now. And it's a reality, obviously, that's become quite warped in the context of COVID as well. So we're going to be talking about mobility in a time when we've been utterly immobile, certainly in terms of physical mobility. We're also going to be talking about mobility in a context where we've been rethinking what we value as a society. And obviously, the environmental crisis is come increasingly to the fore when we think about movement of people and the resource implications of that. And we're going to be thinking about mobility in the context of who moves, who has the opportunities, and the extent to which future mobility not only enables existing relationships to be sustained and enhanced, but also is open to and inclusive of new emergent talent from different backgrounds. So artists from all over the arts sector in different parts of the UK and Europe can benefit from the undoubted positive impact that mobility can have. So these are just a few things I'm sure we're going to touch upon today. And without further ado, we'd like to welcome our first speaker, Dave Moutrey, to offer his perspectives. Dave, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, so just by way of introduction, Manchester is a European city, even post-Brexit. It's still a European city. We might not be in the EU, but we're still European. There are 260 mother tongues spoken in our city, and many of those European languages and variations on European languages. And our city's had a long history of connections with Europe. The city voted to remain in the EU. And so for us to be working with colleagues in other European cities and other European cultures remains and continues to be important to us, and also the natural thing to do. In January 2020, Manchester had the fastest growing economy of any city in Europe, and our international and particularly European connections were important to us in this. Home as an institution in the city of Manchester is of Manchester and of the world, and within that context, Europe continues to be important to us and to our audiences. We continue to present work from European artists and filmmakers. We continue to collaborate with European organisations and institutions. We continue to commission European artists. We continue to support Manchester and UK artists working in Europe. Brexit just made this more difficult and more expensive. In preparation for this event, I emailed some colleagues in Manchester currently working in Europe with European partners with 3 questions to find out if their experience was the same as ours. So to the academics out there, I apologise, this isn't a particularly probably good process or whatever, and knowing that Tom's an economist, he would probably be laughing heartily at the things I'm going to say, but anyway, here we go. So the 3 challenges I asked were, what are the main challenges, sorry, the 3 questions were, what are the main challenges of working in Europe now? What are the main challenges of bringing European work into the UK? And are there any opportunities that didn't exist pre-Brexit? So there's some of the key points that came up. I won't go through everything because people sent me pages. There's a split between quantifiable issues and less quantifiable. So for example, quantifiable, moving goods and people in one hand, and the less quantifiable, loss of international presence. So what are the main challenges of working in Europe now? So the sort of quantifiable things people are telling you about, work visas are now required for each of the 27 countries and are applied for individually rather than in a group. So if you tour 5 countries, you'll have to apply 5 times for 5 different embassies, hand over your passports for a couple of weeks each time. There's uncertainty about what's required in different countries. Some have made it clear, others have not. It can take between 90 and 180 days out there. The point I was going to make, I jumped a line. is that the time that you're allowed to work also takes into account personal and professional holidays, etc. So finding out whether artists have been on holiday for part of that time, as well as working, is also a challenge, is what I'm being told. The loss of the cabotage waiver means that UK trucks are limited to 3 movements in a total across a maximum of 7 days before returning to the UK, which basically means that it's no longer possible to tour Europe using UK transportation. This is problematic as UK companies tour more than European companies, and so it's rare for EU trucking to be industry specific, i.e. this week King Lear, next week King Edward's potatoes, using side curtains rather than high cubes as we use in the UK. It's a challenge. Carnet, now required for movement of all equipment in and out of Europe, and don't let anybody tell you that they're only 150 quid. You can expect to pay between 650 and 2,000 to 3,000, depending on the size of the value of the load, and I'll have to post a bond which is linked to the load value. Shipping rates have rocketed across the world, partly because of COVID, partly Brexit, and all UK ports are overloaded. So that's a particular nightmare as well. Unquantifiable. We've got to work much harder to be seen to be open to working with European partners. And there's a lot of uncertainty and grumpiness from promoters for whom we are already quite expensive, but now are problematic, as well as an extra burden on paperwork, etc. There's a lack of UK presence in European networks, international funding bids. Many of those we can't access anywhere. Market access is a big thing for UK music, for example. The ABO, the Association of British Orchestras, reckon that touring orchestras brought in 14.4 million in 2019 from Europe, and that's going to be a big challenge to get anywhere near that. So the second question, what are the main challenges to bringing European work into the UK? Well, quantifiable, the costs for working in Europe the cost of bringing European companies in are significant, where it's much more generous on fees, per diems, accommodation, etc. The paperwork, possibly about to get worse with the right work checks, the right to work checks. So anyone from the EU wanting to perform in the UK may need to apply for a visa. And there's lots of bureaucracy here. For example, proof of savings, certificate of sponsorship from an event organizer, to name a couple. Unquantifiable challenges for incoming work is it's perceived to be getting harder to generate UK audiences in Europe, because there's a feeling that the UK doesn't want Europeans. For me, that means it's more important for us to show European work, but nevertheless, there's a feeling out there in mainland Europe that's the case. Are there any opportunities that didn't exist pre-Brexit? Due to the complexities and costs of bringing European artists to the UK, there could be more of a focus on UK talent. Some people might see that as an opportunity. This, of course, has a downside in arts organisations becoming far more parochial. Far fewer touring projects in favour of more residency models might be an opportunity. So, if you go to mainland Europe, spending a lot longer in one place rather than moving around might produce a set of better outcomes. The digital competency we've developed during lockdown, not because of Brexit, but creating content that challenges borders and artists, and we can share across Europe. There's an opportunity there. There's a realisation that it's more important than ever to be culturally present in Europe for organisations who see themselves as being connected, as Europe being important, and to create opportunities for young people and artists to travel and collaborate internationally. Europe is still very important, and people are realising that in our sector. It's possibly more difficult for larger organisations to organise big tours. Therefore, it might be easier for smaller organisations to take advantage of the situation and get more out there. And jokingly, half jokingly, one of our colleagues said the only people where there's been any real opportunities for this are lawyers, because actually drawing up the contracts, they're making a lot of money. So to finish. I've talked about a lot of challenges there, and there are some opportunities, but we can still do good stuff. On Friday, we open Viva, Home's Spanish and Latin American Film Festival, with 18 feature films, 11 UK premieres, introductions from curators and actors. We would get more talent here to talk about the work, but we can't because of COVID. But this is the 27th edition of our festival, and a long-term collaboration with the Instituto Cervantes, the Embassy of Spain in London, Asociación Cultural Española, and the BFI, and all of those collaborating to bring fantastic Spanish film to Manchester. And there'll be more. We've got more projects underway. So there are things that we can do. It's not all over. It's just harder and more expensive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave, for introducing us there to some of the structural challenges, but also those perceptual challenges, I think, which are perhaps equally significant. And your point that it's more important than ever to be culturally present in Europe is, I think, absolutely central here. And perhaps also, how do we invigorate the relationship so that European artists and organisations see that it's also quite important to come to the UK, which will be an interesting thing to pursue and to develop. And your point finally that we can still do good stuff is really key, because we are still talking about arts and culture, and we've got to try as hard as we can to rebuild post-COVID, let alone post-Brexit. And everyone is hungry for arts and culture in ways that they weren't perhaps 18 months ago, and the landscape's changed so significantly. So thanks for setting the scene, Dave. I'm going to move on now to Marie Lesoir, and from Culture on the Move. It'd be great to hear from you in terms of your perspective. So over to you, Marie.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thanks again for the invitation, and of course also in collaboration with Charlotte, and thanks, Charlotte, also for your very good paper report, and I will refer to it when I do my short input. So my name is Marie Lesoir, and I am coordinating On the Move, which is a mobility information network. So we have a little bit more than 50 member organizations that work on mobility, and yeah, so we are more on signposting information related to the mobility of artists and cultural professionals, on funding in particular in Europe, but also internationally. I would like to make maybe three main remarks, and some of the points will also very much echo the point made in the report, but also just made by Dave. In your report, Charlotte, so it's good as well because it's also a way to see the process since the Brexit referendum, and also like to recall what has been worked on and what still are remaining as key challenge for the mobility in relation with Brexit and the pandemic. What I really like it's the fact that you mentioned beyond the political, social, economic impact of the Brexit, you mentioned also this fact about the emotion around this emotional aspect of Brexit. And this reminded me that the first general meeting that we had with On the Move post-Brexit happened to be, it was a very nice coincidence, but it happened to be in Cardiff, and under the invitation of our member, Wales Art International, and I know that Zeli is also in the room. So it was symbolically also a way to say, let's stay connected, while bringing more than 30 professionals working on this question of mobility to Wales, and of course to as a message to say, let's stay connected and let's find ways to still continue in one way or the other cooperation and at least discussion going on. And the role of the network on that matter is quite interesting also to observe. We have seen in many European cultural networks, an increase of UK member organization. I mean, we are not a massive network as far as On the Move is concerned, but among the 10 new members, about 10 new members we have had for the past 2 or 3 years, 3 of them new members are from the UK. In particular, the Arts Council of England, D6 Culture in Transit, and also the PRS Foundation beyond Wales Art International. So this network being seen also as a space for exchange, continuing conversation, and finding new ways to continue to collaborate despite the fact that many funding schemes are not available anymore, or are more limited, at least from a European perspective, to the UK art sector. In relation also with your report, Charlotte, and the recommendation that are made, so I think they echo very much, like for instance, to call for a more favorable visa regime. So it really connects to what Dave was saying, this question also of supporting more prospection, travel bursary or travel grant to take part in meetings and so on. This echo very much what we hear, what we observe, and what we would add, particularly based on our observation since the beginning of this year, is also the crucial need to support more organizations that provide tailor-made information, and I would say on a free basis, particularly on all these legal and regulatory aspects, because not all, it's only a minority of theater company, collective, artists that can hire lawyer or legal experts. So we very much fear that the diversity of the sector that could benefit from mobility support and from collaboration may be excluded from that kind of exchange. And when I say how to support, because let's talk about challenge, but let's talk also about solution that can work. I am referring in particular to a mobility info point, and I am sharing the link of this mobility info point in the chat. So mobility info point are basically organizations that are a member of On the Move in Europe, and we have also one member in the US, which provide information on all these legal aspects related to the mobility of artists and cultural professionals. And they were really set up with this idea of making this information accessible to the majority of artists and cultural professionals, and not only to the happy few, I would say. And here I would like also particularly to acknowledge the Arts Info Point UK, which is supported by different council of the 4 nations. And there was already a mobility info point part of Wealth Art International, but now there is also this overall support to this organization. And such point of information are important because more than ever, this tailor-made approach is crucial, because each case, of course, you can find information in different guides. There are more and more now which are available. You mentioned the one written by Anya and Nadine Patel, Charlotte. There are different guides which are available, but usually when you receive the question by artists and cultural professionals, they can be extremely specific also, let's say, to the nationality that compose a theater company who are going to the UK. And of course, now they are not only specific to the Brexit situation, but also to the pandemic regulation. And as we all know, it can change from one day to the other, and it's also related to each member state regulation. And on this last point on this question of this accessibility information provision system, it has also, we noticed that, we are not the only one to notice that, but I really would like to make the point that some sectors are pretty well structured, organized, like the performing art, the music sector, for instance, but the visual art sector is much less visible in terms of the needs, in terms of, because it's also a sector which is more individually based, with individual artists, freelance curator, and so on. And we also very much fear that, the precarity in which some of them are already living may be even more affected, because sometimes if they lack the information, maybe they will go for the mobility and after will have to pay even more money for whatever tax or cost that they didn't expect because they didn't get the right information at the right moment. A last point I wanted to mention as well, it's more, sorry, I was very practical about this question, but yeah, it's also because we receive, and after we signpost the relevant organization, but we receive quite a lot of requests on this subject at the moment. And we see the urgency to tackle this issue. A last point I wanted to mention is also like when I was reading your report, Charlotte, I I was also recalled the statement made on the 31st of January 2020 by the European Cultural Foundation, and which was supported by more than 100 organizations and networks, and it was called Brexit and a Cultural Way Forward Together. And it reminded very much that, of course, Brexit is not a UK problem, it's a more like global European problem, and it called also for a renewed commitment to the building, and here I am quoting, to the building and strengthening shared European cultural spaces, of which the UK has always been and will always be part. And I wanted to quote this, talking about this share, how to work on this shared common space, and also taking into consideration one, sorry for the EU jargon, one added value of the UK as far as international collaboration is concerned, is very much this topic-based approach. I mean, when I say topic-based approach is, for instance, on the question of environmental sustainability, on the question as well on the digital, on the question of diversity, accessibility, inclusion, with On the Move and 8 other European cultural networks, we are working on a European project which is called Shift, and we work on this different issue. And it's just amazing how much resource experiences on this subject we can find in the UK. And which is, I mean, this is not only an English, I would say, language issue, because of course a lot of information is available in English and accessible for us, but there is really a lot of information, resource experience that, and we really think that we should still find a way to really connect the art and cultural sector around this issue. And since European funding is not possible, so how to find a way, you know, like to keep the, you know, the dialogue going on this particular issue, where the UK has a very specific expertise, which is very enriching for the rest of Europe and EU member country in particular. So, I mean, I can talk a bit more about that, but I thought on this topic-based approach, this is quite a unique point as far as international relation is concerned. It could be quite interesting to further elaborate on. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Marie. And I just, if I may, just like to ask you a question about that and the topic-based, I guess, terms of engagement for mobility activities. And I just wonder whether, given the amount of structural challenges, the cost implications, the bureaucratic implications of Brexit and COVID, that might put off a lot of artists, organisations from endeavouring to develop cultural exchange through mobility. So the question is really the extent to which we need to campaign for and promote the value of mobility to those who may be hesitant coming out of this crisis.
Sorry, it's a comment or a question?
It's a question, sorry, it's a question hidden within a comment. To what extent do you think we need to raise the stakes, really, to actually really celebrate and promote?
But I think, yeah, definitely there is this need, but a lot of, I remember 3 years ago, there was a meeting organized on Brexit and the impact on the art and cultural sector in Brussels with the British Council, the European Cultural Foundation and Beaux-Arts. And already at that time, and I guess since it has been even more, there have been a lot of reports made on the impact, on the positive impact of mobility on the art and cultural sector, both in terms, of course, of the economic dimension. I mean, for many companies, the fact of being international is really part of their income as well. So I guess the argumentation is there. I mean, I was quite amazed already like 3 years ago to see all these reports, and I said, wow, it would be great if we could do that also in many more European countries. So, but of course we didn't want, you know, like, oh, you need a Brexit to have that kind of report. So you have already that kind of argumentation, but now it's how also to support, to still continue to support this initiative on a, I would say, in a very short-term perspective, with questions which are coming now, And it's also how you build your knowledge on this particular question based on the question asked by the sector. And after, definitely there need to be additional funding scheme that can complement what has been either totally erased or limited by the leaving of the European Union. But I think, I mean, this is not so much personal point of view, but there are many reports which already have strong argumentation points, which can be part also of advocacy campaign and so on.
Yeah, absolutely, I think it's really key, and I think it's also obviously key that we make sure that people don't sort of get left behind in this, or for whom Europe might seem increasingly distant because of different challenges and different barriers. So people who are coming into the sector who haven't been, haven't thrived in a context of lots of mobility and cultural exchange. So there's a kind of forward planning element in this as well. Marie, thank you so much for that intervention. It's triggered lots and lots of thinking, I'm sure, for our colleagues in terms of where we are and where we go next. I want to move on now to Geoffrey Brown, who's committed his professional life really to building cultural relations and fixing things and brokering connections and finding ways to enable mobility happens. Geoffrey, where are we now?
Well, doom, misery and woe, rain, toads and bats and plague and bogs and pox. Yes, I come from this from a slightly different perspective. I mean, the issues of mobility and all the things that Dave outlined in particular, and the work that Marie's network and other networks and Arts Info Point are trying to do affect everybody. And I think they're absolutely crucial, and it's really important that those be addressed. My perspective is slightly different because I've spent the last 20 years helping people participate with funding and support from the various European funding programs. And my challenge at the moment is to see whether or not I have a job, in fact. Do I have any role in the future, given the fact that we are no longer part of the European, or the UK is no longer part of the European Union? Where do I fit in, or where does the UK fit in, and how might it happen in the future? So I'm going to take a slightly different look at the European Union itself, and just very briefly, because I don't want to spend as much time on this as has been spent on the other areas, which I think are perhaps more challenging to more people. But I think that the relationships with the European Union itself is an area that we shouldn't ignore. And I think particularly the point that was made at the end there about the fact that now we're out of the European Union, people will get used to the fact that we're out of the European Union, and this idea of potentially participating in transnational European activity might sort of just dissipate as a potential challenge. And I don't want to see that happen. I mean, there is a new context in the European Union. I think it's important to be aware of that. I'm going to very quickly rattle through this, so apologies, but I'm happy to sort of send a document if anybody wants it. I mean, not only are there new funding programs, and the new 7-year round of funding starts in 2021, but the European Union itself is the recipient of a vast amount of post-COVID recovery funds, the next generation EU funds, of which a chunk, I mean, even a tiny chunk is a huge amount of money. A tiny chunk is going to go to the arts and cultural sector. And there are a whole raft of other initiatives that we need to be aware of, such as the new European Bauhaus initiative, which is looking to make the Green Deal a cultural, human-centered and positive, tangible experience. It talks about connecting different realities in the post-COVID situation. It wants form to follow the planet, all that sort of stuff. Okay, but it's a really important initiative and shows the way in which thinking is evolving at the European level. On a practical level, obviously we've focused on helping people become involved in the transnational European funding programs. Entertainingly, of course, the structural funds are still around for a few more years. I was driving through Manchester the other day and noticed a building site covered with brand new signs saying, "Give thanks to the European Union for this funding from the European Union Regional Development Fund. So that funding is still around in a few years. But the transnational funds are the funds that are most relevant in terms of transnational funding in the future. The education and culture programs, Erasmus+, Creative Europe, the New Europe for Citizens program, which is now termed Citizenship, Equality, Rights and Values, the European Solidarity Corps, Horizon Europe, which has got a whole interesting new section on culture and creativity, potentially the LIFE program and others. And let's not forget that within EU funding programs, many projects are funded, which then invite applications for people to participate in those programs. So, for example, the iPortunus project is one where the organizers invite applications from other cultural organizations to participate. So funding can happen at several different levels. There are new programs in 2021. There have been the usual delays in launching. Calls are now out for the culture program, for Erasmus+, and for the new Citizenship, Equality, Rights and Values. There were deadlines in June, you've missed them, and there were deadlines coming up in September. And other funding opportunities will be coming out, and we are monitoring those and trying to keep people up to date about that. The key thing for the UK is that, of course, we are now a third country. We are a non-eligible third country, one of those. We cannot have a role in any way greater than that of the core partners. And if we're involved in any way in any activity, the costs of that activity have to be paid via a core partner. No one can give a UK organization a grant because we are now a third country. If we are involved, the costs, the invoices have to be sent off to another a partner to be paid, which is going to be a huge amount of hassle. UK organizations could contribute funding to the project, but one has to ask the questions, why on earth would they want to do that? However, does anyone in Europe want the UK to be involved in transnational projects? And interestingly, and this reinforces what Marie was saying, the big answer is yes. I mean, UK partners have a good reputation. Apart from the fact they speak English as their first language, the ongoing lingua franca of the EU, UK partners are generally seen as being organized, good managers, proactive, enthusiastic, and so on. And we're also seen as being advanced in certain areas. We're not the only country that's seen this way, but we are seen as being advanced in certain areas, particularly ones relevant to social issues and cultural change. Apart from the EU, of course, there are other non-EU opportunities for transnational activities, European Cultural Foundation, STEP grants, and various others, which we haven't got time to go into there. The main challenge, I think, about being involved in transnational, apart from the practical, is the information sources. Now, one of the problems, of course, is that since Brexit happened, there are no official contact points in the United Kingdom for the various funding programs, except for Horizon Europe. So who is providing the stimulus, the information, the awareness, the understanding? I'm sure that organizations like Arts Info Point and others will do their very best to make information aware, but they're going to be, in my view, I think that they're going to have their hands full dealing with the challenges of just keeping people updated about the difficulties of meeting the challenges, for example, that Dave Moutrey was outlining as well. So who is providing this information? I mean, we're thinking about providing it, but to be absolutely honest at this stage, I've got no idea whether it's actually going to be financially viable. And we are an independent organization. If we can't generate income from these sorts of activities, then it's just not possible for us to do it. So we're looking at how we can contribute to making sure that transnational activity of one form or another forms some part, it may only be a small part, but some part of the way in which things work in the future. And I think that's all I really want to say, just to give you a bit of an overview but from that particular perspective, which is slightly different. Obviously, getting involved in transnational projects may then introduce people to the challenges involved in mobility. So there is obviously overlapping Venn diagrams here that have to be dealt with. But I'll stop at that particular point of view. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Geoffrey. That was fascinating and also hugely informative. And I think you've touched on something that others have touched on, which is about information. And this is all critical, isn't it? And if people haven't got information, then they don't know what to do, and then they won't do it. And all those that do it are those that have got access to privileged information, which is not everybody. So I think there's a big questions around inclusion, around who benefits and who travels fundamentally. I just want to ask you one question, quick question to add to the conversation, which is around who else might broker information or build the relationships. And obviously Dave works with Manchester City Council, and I just wonder whether municipalities might have a role to play here in the future, you know, if they are more outward looking and internationalist than perhaps national government from a UK perspective. Could they play a role here?
I personally think that local authorities might be quite crucial, because I think that there are some challenges in the national or the national Scottish, Welsh and so on agencies. At that level, I think there are some difficulties, because I think that there is a bit of a government writ going around which says that we are now out of the EU. We government do not want to see any money being spent on activity that's going to promote involvement with the EU. I think there is a sort of, there's a subtext going on there. However, local authorities are A, independent, and B, have a bit of a reputation of not necessarily going along with everything the government happens to say, including particularly the current Conservative government. So it would be wonderful if there were a few local authorities such as Manchester, and I'm sure there are others as well, who might be interested in providing some resource in this area. And we would be happy to work with them or support them if that was the case. I mean, it's early days. I mean, okay, it's now July. We left at the beginning of the year. But as you can see from everything going on around, they're still trying to sort out I's and T's, dots and crosses about all aspects of Brexit. So I think that some of this is going to take at least another 6 months before it becomes clear.
Thank you, Geoffrey. And the reality of being a third country as well. So we're essentially Turkey. I'm sure there's some sort of irony wrapped up in becoming Turkey in this context, but that's going to take some time to sink in, isn't it?
I think we're even worse off than Turkey, because at least Turkey is on a list of potential members of the EU. We're not even on that list anymore. Okay, we may be in 5 years' time when people realize what a disaster Brexit has been, but we're not there yet. So we're even further down the queue. And I think that makes it even, that makes particularly additionally challenging.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Geoffrey. I'm going to move on now to Toni, who's sitting in Malta, ready to address this. So Toni, not only a cultural professional doing a lot of work in terms of policy and research, but also a practicing artist and producer. So you can see the world from both perspectives. So Toni, over to you.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you for the invitation. Greetings from sunny and very hot island in the Med. That is technically still a newbie in a way, considering its relationship within as a member state within the EU. So as a relatively young person myself, I experienced the difference not being in the EU and being in the EU. And I mean, I'll try to respond to what the previous speakers highlighted, and I think I'm in agreement with all the points. Having said that, I think we didn't really debate mobility itself today. And I think when we talk about mobility, we tend to have much more this idea of outgoing mobility. And I'm very happy that Dave mentioned incoming artists, because even the articles I've read about Brexit and artists, they tended to be, us going out and the issues of us working within the European Union. I think it's very important to understand that even probably what will happen in a post-COVID environment is even the notion of mobility is changing and shifting to much more longer term, more relationship type of engagement, which of course means that the transaction, if it's longer, it will have legal implications, because we can't spend a longer time in a country, in an environment where we're saying, you should spend a month or two in that country, because that is, in terms of environmental sustainability as well, and creating these kind of relationships, it's going to make it even more complex. I would like to highlight one important point, that the UK is not out of Europe. It is still a European country. And I think that this change in narrative is important. Just to give you a little bit of an anecdote, yesterday I was announced as the artistic director of EuroPride, which will happen in Malta in 2023. And I've been thinking in terms of the program, what will I do, what kind of artists, who do I know? The first thing you look out for as an artistic director is your network. And of course, a lot of UK artists feature in this list, and UK organizations. And I was shocked at my own first reaction. I said, no, there are way too many UK people for this EuroPride thing in my list. My first reaction was like, it's like creating this distinction between UK and Europe. And then I had to kind of come to terms with the fact that it's part of the same thing. It's not European Union pride, it's Euro pride. And probably this narrative also may need to come also from the art sector itself. As David saying, you know, we are still European, we will be European, and we want to work with Europe. So my first point is also the cultural implications of all this. Probably those cities, organizations who have been actively being European will continue to be European, and probably will motivate them to be more active. There is also an implication that this cultural implication is non-artistic. You know, let's not talk about, or we can talk about nationalism and the rise of nationalism and this whole question of European values. And this is a European issue. Let's just think about what I mentioned, issues happening in Hungary and Poland with the LGBTIQ community. These are European challenges, and that doesn't mean that it's just about an economic transaction between one country and the other. So in that case, I would consider the UK to be a very important European partner to address other issues, which I think the arts and culture should also be concerned about. Another cultural implication is the historical connection. Now, of course, for those of you who know Malta, you know that there's a historical connection, for example, between Malta and the UK. And I don't think that this is necessarily going to change, that historical connection will stay there. And also from a language point of view. However, there are the economic implications, and this brings me to the second point, which we've mentioned. Let's not kid ourselves. Bureaucracy, issues of employment, taxation, income tax, VAT, all this is an additional, not just administrative burden, it's also a legal burden. And in fact, I'm not even sure whether this is even going to benefit. Somebody mentioned that this could also support smaller organizations, increase their touring capacity and engagement. If large organizations are finding this difficult, can you imagine a small emerging organization to actually navigate through the system? And also, let's not forget that if I'm an artistic director and I want a particular company, I don't care where they come from, I want them. I've programmed artists who actually needed to apply not just for their visa, but for their passport in countries where Malta had no representation. And I still managed because I wanted them. But these tend to be an exception. Now, you can't have a whole sector that requires this exceptionality. So probably rely on their entertainment jobs, for example, from you know, touring into cruise liner industries, etc., etc. Probably the appetite of the employer to go through this process is not going to be as strong as engaging any other European artist or entertainer. So you know, there are other implications from an economic financial point of view that will require specific changes. The third and final point I want to elaborate on, and we did mention here, is that this has policy implications. First and foremost, the fact that the UK specifically did not subscribe to European programs, just Creative Europe and Erasmus, as Geoffrey mentioned, has a very strong political message, but it also has a policy message in terms of changes, or how do you fill in that 40 million sterling gap of EU funding that used to go for EU collaboration within the UK. But it also will require member states to look at their own policies from a cultural perspective. So just to give you an example, I'm one of the authors of Malta's cultural policy, and one of the things we had to address in our policy is how do we fill in the gap where the UK arts education sector was considered to be the top number one where Maltese young artists tended to go to study, where now the fees are changing, where now more funding is required to do this. So our cultural policy had to address this. On the other hand, our cultural policy said, of course, we're looking at Europe, but we're also looking at the Mediterranean. So suddenly, within this conversation of the Euro-Mediterranean context, there's a bit of a gap, which I feel that, as Geoffrey was saying, in terms of round that discussion table, if we have a Euro-Mediterranean cultural policy, how will the UK contribute to that? which means that we're not really talking just about cultural policy here. So many other national policies or European policies are implied. So this is not just, I mean, when I was part of the working group at EU level on mobility, you know, everyone kept on saying this has nothing to do with cultural policy, it's about foreign affairs. So it's also about how, as a policymaker, you are going to engage with other departments, other policies that will impact the cultural sector. Because most of this actually doesn't even come out from any cultural policy. It comes from economic policy, fiscal measures, and other legal measures, which is why it's a huge pity that the idea of a cultural passport did not go through, and hopefully it will be flagged up on another occasion. I wanted to also flag up, and I'll send you the link for the iPortunus program, which I'm part of the research team there to look at, which is, I think, a good example of how specific funding programs and schemes can be developed to also include the UK, because in this case, it's 40 countries. I find it pretty ironic that actually it's listed as 40 countries plus the UK, sorry, 40 European countries plus the UK. I'm like, well, because even it's very interesting that the same narrative coming from the Commission also is showing this kind of, you know, uncomfortable, I would say, relationship. Just think about, you know, the commissioner wished Italy, you know, as opposed to the England team, well, to win the football match a couple of weeks ago. So I agree with Geoffrey that yes, there is eagerness and appetite and interest from European artists to collaborate, including the UK. There's also a level of excellence there, which other European artists won't continue to aspire to work with UK artists, and that's not going to go away. No, I keep on mentioning this. No artist has ever waited for any policy to create. But on the other hand, policies may slow down that process, may make it more bureaucratic, and this is, I think, the biggest challenge we see here. The key here is information, and I also reiterate this. I mean, from my end, I've also tried to organize an info session in my capacity as Vice President of the Malta Entertainment Industry and Arts Association on how Maltese artists can engage with UK artists, and it was close to impossible to find the right information. Maybe it was, you know, some areas it was too early, others it's like it's a wait and see, and others we're still waiting for legislation. So of course this brings insecurity. This brings insecurity, and the longer it takes, then the longer it's going to take to get back to business, to get back to the co-creation, the transnational cultural cooperation, which we all desperately need, especially at this particular time. So, you know, my key message is let's get our house in order, because everyone needs to get their house in order, and really make sure that we can get back to business. So that's my final thought.
Thank you, Toni, for leaving on, I think, a practical and dare I say, optimistic note there as well. We do need to get back to business, and we don't want to let this drift. And access to information and equality of access to information, I think, has come through very clearly in the from each of the speakers this afternoon. And also, just another reflection, your point about this, you know, how culture is often in the background or foregrounded by economy, foreign affairs issues, etc. But also perhaps that's the way in to investing in artist mobility and cultural relations. And Marie made the point as well around topic-based approaches to mobility. So if we think about the European Green Deal, the Bauhaus, new European Bauhaus, we think about European capitals of culture, UK cities of culture, etc. There could be some shared opportunities around urbanism, around environmental sustainability, around interculturalism and inclusion, etc. Not to instrumentalize the arts, but to actually give it a platform for investment from which exchange might come. We've reached the point where we've heard from each of our speakers. I want to thank you all for your incredibly helpful and insightful And I think broadly, you know, there's been a kind of positivity and a can-do element to this as well, which is really important, so that we don't drift as may otherwise be the case. I want to thank you all for your interventions. What we're going to do now is pause for a second whilst the recording ceases, and then we're going to open this up into a conversation with all of our colleagues who are